Hello and welcome to another episode of Saga Stories with the Reykjavík Grapevine. My name is Matthew Roby and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Iceland. And today we're going to be talking about Harðar Saga. The entire plot of Harðar Saga takes place in the 10th century, all of it before Christianization. Some version of the story might have existed in the 14th or even 13th centuries, but the version that we're talking about today is first attested in the 15th century. Harðar Saga recounts the tragic life of a man named Hörðr, a courageous, intelligent and generally honourable man, but he's very unlucky and he has friends who are a bad influence on him and he ends up becoming an outlaw. And so it's the story of that descent into outlawry and his ultimate death that we're going to be talking about today. And in order to tell this story of Harðar Saga, we've come here to Ölfusvatn. We're on the southwestern shore of Þingvallavatn, and in fact Þingvellir, where we previously did a video, is just 15 kilometers northeast of here. And as you can see all around us, we are within the archaeological remains of a medieval farmstead, the medieval farmstead of Ölfusvatn, which is very possibly the same farmstead where the hero of Harðar Saga, Hörðr, was born and grew up for the first 3 years of his life. Before Hörðr was born, his mother Signy had a dream one night. She dreamt that she saw her marital bed and rising out of it was a huge tree with deep roots and many branches, but it didn't have very many leaves. As I mentioned, this all took place prior to Christianization, and after Signy has this dream, she speaks to her pagan foster mother about it and asks her to interpret it for her. And she says that this dream means that you're going to have a son. Now, the strength of the tree and the big roots and big branches mean that he's going to be a very honourable man and a great man. But the fact that it doesn't have very many leaves suggests that he's not going to turn out very well. And she makes a specific prediction that he's probably going to have a bad relationship with other members of his family. When Hörðr is born, like many saga heroes that we've talked about, he's prodigious in many ways. He's a very large child, but there is one unusual thing about him. He doesn't start walking on his own until the age of 3. And everyone, of course, thinks that's quite unusual. He's prodigious in these other respects, being so large, but unable to walk. And we're going to tell the story of his first walking at the age of 3. Now, with the presence of these archaeological remains, it's very easy to imagine the 3-year-old Hörðr and his mother Signy in a room somewhere on this exact spot. Signy is sitting on a chair and her very favourite pendant is in her lap. Apparently she's getting ready for some kind of pagan ceremony. And it's at that moment that Hörðr decides to take his first steps. He gets up off the floor and takes a couple of teetering steps towards her, but then stumbles and bumps into her and knocks her pendant to the ground where it smashes. Now his mother Signy is incredibly angry about this, so much so that she utters a very famous curse to him. She says, "Hörðr, your first journey went badly, and many other bad ones will follow. But the worst will be last of all." Now, the father hears Hörðr's mother speak this curse, and he's incredibly angry that she would have cursed their son, so much so that he goes to the length of moving Hörðr away to be fostered with one of their friends. But of course, by this point, the curse has already been spoken. Did it cause Hörðr's misfortune, or merely predict it? In any case, it foreshadows the disasters that follow Hörðr for the rest of his life. Like many of the heroes that we've already talked about in the Saga Stories series, Hörðr goes abroad on a journey to continental Scandinavia as a young man. He goes when he's 15 years old, and there are 2 people who go with him. One of them is Geir, who is Hörðr's foster brother, and who is less wise than Hörðr, and another is Helgi, who is a friend of Hörðr, who is a general troublemaker. And in spite of their presence on this trip, the journey actually goes quite well for Hörðr. Like the other saga heroes that go to continental Scandinavia, he uses this trip to win renown. And one of the greatest deeds that he commits while he's there is breaking into the grave mound of the dead Viking Soti, killing the revenant, there's the reanimated sort of zombie of Soti while he's there, and stealing Soti's treasure, among which is an important arm ring that Hörðr takes for himself, as well as an ancient sword that was owned by this ancient Viking. But before the zombie dies, he curses the arm ring that Hörðr is taking out of his mound, saying that it will cause him to have an ill fate. So this obviously compounds the ill fate that we already know he's going to have, based on the dream of the tree and based on the curse that was put upon him by his mother. Now, while Hörðr is in Scandinavia, he also gets married. He gets married to Helga, who is the daughter of a jarl in Goitland, and with her he will have 2 children, the eldest named Grimkell and the youngest Björn. Now, when he returns to Iceland, he settles down on a farm, but then a few years after his arrival, he gets into a bit of trouble with his neighbour. This trouble arises due to the wounding of one of Hörðr's horses, and things escalate. They partially escalate because this troublemaker that I mentioned, Hörðr's friend Helgi, kills the son of his neighbour in this dispute. And as things are escalating, Hörðr, who is still an honourable man, tries to stay calm, tries to follow legal procedure, but ends up, as things escalate, killing his neighbour and burning his house down. And now at the next thing, Hörðr is outlawed. And again, this is partially because of a miscommunication that results from using this troublemaker Helgi as a messenger. And after Hörðr is outlawed, he decides to move his whole household to the household of his foster brother, Geir. Now, of course, when you've got all the people from 2 households living on only one farmstead, you might run out of supplies quite quickly. And this is what happens. And so in order to feed all the people that are living at his house, Geir resorts to stealing food from a neighbour. Now, when Hörðr finds out about this theft, again, still being an honourable man despite being an outlaw, he says, I will now take control of the farm management. And he finds the farmer from whom the supplies were stolen, and he apologises and recompenses him. But the farmers of the region suspect that the continuing poverty of the household of Hörðr and Geir will lead them to steal again. So they plot to kill Hörðr. And when Hörðr finds out about this plot, he ends up moving here. There's an island in the bay here, and one of the words for island in Old Norse is Hólmr. And he moves his household and Geir's household out to this island, which is in the mouth of Hvalfjörður. We're about 35 kilometres northeast of Reykjavík. He takes the timbers from Geir's farm and builds himself a fortified hall on this island, on this Hólmr. And it actually takes the name Geirshólmr, named after his foster brother. So he moves his household here, and once he's built this fortified hall, other wanderers and outlaws from the region start to flock to the island, and eventually it becomes its own little community. According to the saga, there are never fewer than 80 people living there, and sometimes there are as many as 200 people living there. And the community even develops its own rules. One of the rules that the saga says that they have is that anyone who is caught lying idle in bed for more than 72 hours, more than 3 nights, will be thrown onto the rocks and exiled from the community. Now, as you can see from the size of Geirshólmr, it's only about 80 feet by 40 feet. You can't farm on this island. And so the outlawed Hörðr and his gang of sort of misfits and wanderers and outlaws, they take to stealing from the farmers around Hvalfjörður. They steal from the households of 3 sorceresses, and they also steal from 2 of Hörðr's brothers-in-law who have farms in the region. They have one pact with a farmer who lives just at the mouth of the fjord here, whose name is Þorsteinn Gullknappur, which means Þorsteinn Gold Button. He owns a boat, and they have a pact with Þorsteinn that they won't rob him or take supplies from him on the condition that he will ferry more outlaws to and from the island so they can use his boat, that he will keep them abreast of any schemes that are going on with the farmers. He will alert them to danger. Now, after they have lived this life of crime for a while, Hörðr, who in his heart is still an honourable man, he tries to implore the rest of the people who live on Geirshólmr to give up their life of crime. But the outlaws don't agree, and neither does his foster brother Geir. In fact, Geir suggests, maybe we can give up the life of crime soon, but first I'd like to get even with some of the farmers who haven't supported us during your outlawry. And one of those is one of the people that they've already stolen from, Hörðr's brother-in-law, Indriði. Geir says, I'd like to burn Indriði in his house. And Hörðr, who is outnumbered, he thinks that he would like to give up this life of crime, but none of the other outlaws seem to. He can do nothing but just go along with this idea. So one night they go and try to burn Indriði in his house, but luckily Þorbjörg, who is Hörðr's sister, the wife of Indriði, this farmer, manages to thwart the burning. She prevents the house from setting on fire by diverting some water from a stream near to the farmstead, and the burning itself doesn't work. But of course, now that they've tried to burn one of the farmers in, which is obviously an escalation of violence, it's much worse than just stealing, the farmers of the region, they want to get together and have a meeting and talk about what they can do about this outlaw problem, the problem of the outlaws on Hólmr. Indriði is one of the leaders of the meeting, and his wife, Hörðr's sister, Þorbjörg, is told that she shouldn't come to the meeting. But she decides to go anyway. She arrives alone, and when the farmers are all assembled, she arrives on a horse and makes a proclamation, because she can tell what the meeting is about. And she says, "Whoever kills my brother Hörðr, I will kill them." And then she leaves, and the farmers have their meeting. And what they talk about at the meeting is this. They devise a plan to kill Hörðr and the rest of the outlaws. What they're going to do is send one man in a boat to the island and offer the outlaws free passage, basically allowing them to come onto the mainland, travel somewhere else into Iceland. They won't hinder them, they won't kill them, and they can just start afresh somewhere else. If they want to be outlaws and criminals still, that's fine, but they have to get out of the region. And so after they've had this meeting, then they've come to this conclusion, they arrive here on this headland. They set off the very night of the meeting, and the next morning they arrive here. And in fact, the saga says they eat their pre-noon meal here, for which the Old Norse word is Dögurðar. And so the saga says that's why this headland is called Dögurðarnes, which means breakfast headland or breakfast peninsula. So they select one of the farmers to take a boat out to the island. In fact, they take the boat of Þorsteinn Gullknappur, because they think that he's been helping the outlaws, so they steal his boat and use it for the purpose. They select one of the farmers, Kjartan, to go and deliver this message to the people of Hólmr. When Kjartan arrives, he makes the offer, says, I'll take groups of the outlaws to the mainland and give you free passage somewhere else in Iceland. Hörðr doesn't trust him. He can smell something fishy about this, and he thinks they're going to be betrayed. But again, his less wise friends, his more foolhardy friends, can't see any problem with this. Among them, Geir and Helgi, they suggest, yes, let's do this, let's go along with this plan. So Kjartan takes about a third of the outlaws on his first trip, brings them back to this headland here, and when they arrive at the shore, the rest of the farmers gang up on them, capture them and behead them. Kjartan then goes out for a second time to Hólmr and asks for the next group to come onto the boat. This time, almost everyone leaves the island, including Geir, and basically they leave Hörðr, his wife Helga, their 2 children, the 8-year-old Grímkell and the 4-year-old Björn and Helgi. But everyone else basically goes on this second trip, and they get on the boat and they come on the way to this headland. When they come close to the headland, Hörðr's foster brother Geir, who is on the boat, can see the group of farmers waiting for them on the shore, and perhaps implicitly he can see the bodies of his beheaded outlaw companions on the headland too, and so he suspects that something is afoot. He suspects they're going to be betrayed. He admits that he has not been as wise as Hörðr, and maybe he shouldn't have been pushing for his ideas, but rather should have been taking Hörðr's advice more throughout his life, and he tries to jump out of the boat and swim to safety. One of the farmers on the shore has a spear and throws it into the water at Geir, and it pierces him and he's killed. And the body supposedly washes up on the very end of this headland at a place which is now called Geirstangi, which means Geir's point, the point at which the body washed up. And then, of course, the boatload of people does come to the shore. All of the outlaws that are on the boat are executed once more. And Kjartan goes for his 3rd and final trip to Hólmr after that, and now says, Hörðr, it's your turn, you have to come and get on the boat. Now, of course, Hörðr still doesn't trust him, and he's very reluctant to go. And Kjartan manages to convince him by goading him and questioning his masculinity. He says, I never would have thought that you, Hörðr, would be less brave than all of your other outlaws. And as is quite common in sagas, when a hero's masculinity and courage and honour is questioned, even if the thing that they're being asked to do is against their better judgment, they still do it because they can't stand the shame of having their masculinity and their courage impugned. So Hörðr says, yes, I will go. Helgi goes too, and so do the rest of the outlaws. The only people who choose to stay on Hólmr are Helga and the children. She won't let the children go either. She can see that treachery is afoot. She can tell that Hörðr is doomed. And she simply says, nothing can rescue the doomed. That's what she says to her husband. She can see now that sort of fate is fixed. She can't save him. And so she lets him get on the boat. She herself is crying as they depart. Now, as with Geir, when Hörðr comes close to the headland, he can see that it was a trap. And in fact, the body of Geir washes up near the boat. So Hörðr can see that they've been betrayed. At that moment, he decides to draw the ancient sword that he took from the grave mound in Gotland, from the Viking Soti, and cut Kjartan from his shoulders down to his waist. But it does him little good, because the boat is already very close to the headland. It washes up on the shore. The farmers manage to surround the remaining outlaws on the boat and tie them up and begin executing them. Now, at this point, they've got both Hörðr and Helgi tied up, and they're surrounded. And Indriði, Hörðr's brother-in-law, holds out an axe, offering for any one of the farmers to kill him. But no one can bring themselves to do so, perhaps because they know deep down that Hörðr is an honourable man, or perhaps just because they are afraid of him. In any case, Hörðr uses this hesitation of the farmers to escape. He manages to get free of his bonds, grab the axe that was being held out by his brother-in-law, and apparently he makes an almost supernatural leap over the ring of farmers that are encircling them. Apparently it's a ring that's 3 men deep, but he manages to jump over it and begin running. And in the confusion, his troublemaking friend Helgi also manages to escape, and they begin running back towards the mainland, down the headland. The farmers try to chase them, and even apparently one of them is on a horse, but they can't catch them, they're running so quickly. But at that point, Hörðr is stricken by some kind of supernatural tiredness, supernatural exhaustion, which is implied to come from one of the sorceresses from whom they'd already been stealing supplies. He manages to shake off this supernatural tiredness, not once, but twice. But the 3rd time that it takes him, he ends up having to collapse on the ground. Helgi is also very tired at that point, and they get surrounded once more. Once they've been surrounded, Again, people cannot bring themselves to kill him, perhaps because they're afraid of him. He manages to shake off this supernatural tiredness once more, uses the axe that he stole to kill 3 of them, and escapes again. This time, because Helgi is exhausted almost to the point of death, he's carrying Helgi on his back and continuing to run back along the headland. Now, he's carrying Helgi on his back. He ends up reaching the end of the headland, where the mainland is there, and starts to climb the mountain that's at the end of the fjord here with Helgi on his back. But then this sorceress casts this spell one more time, causes Hörðr to have this supernatural tiredness, and he collapses for the last time. He drops Helgi, he uses the axe that he took from Indriði and cuts Helgi in two, saying, "I'd rather kill him myself than let my enemies kill him." And they surround him now for the 3rd and final time. Again, no one can seem to bring themselves to kill him. The saga now says it's because Hörðr is so angry, he's almost in a berserk rage, that he's terrifying to them. And no one is brave enough to kill him, even though at this point he's exhausted and the head of the axe that he's been carrying has now fallen off. So he's unarmed, but still no one can bring themselves to kill him until another of the leading farmers, this happens to be Torvi, who is actually Hörðr's uncle. He says, whoever will kill him now can have that great arm ring from the Viking Soti. Still, none of the farmers are brave enough to do so, but at that moment, Thorsteinn Guttknappur, the farmer with whom the outlaws had a pact, comes out of his farm, which is also at the mouth of the fjord here, with a long-handled axe. And he approaches Hörðr from behind and manages to kill him. It's obviously a very tragic scene, because this brave and honourable man has had all these tribulations through his life, and he even puts up this amazing last stand, but is ultimately killed in quite a cowardly way from behind. During his last stand, the saga says that Hörðr has killed 13 of his enemies, and even the farmers who are still alive, who were attacking him, praise his courage and his intelligence, although he obviously was very unlucky. They agree that it was the other men in Hörðr's life, especially Geir and Helgi, who were foolhardy or troublemaking, who were responsible for his downfall, and also they come to the conclusion that no one can escape their fate. Of course, even from his birth, Hörðr was doomed to have an ill fate, and that was how it turned out. But the story doesn't end there. As you may remember, Helga and her children, the 8-year-old Grímkell and the 4-year-old Björn, were left on Geirshólmr, the island as you can see there out in the fjord just above this power line. They were left there the 3rd time the boat went and took the outlaws to the peninsula, to Dögurðarnes peninsula over there. Now the farmers have decided that it's now too late in the day to go and get Helga, but they don't intend to spare her or give her any clemency. They just decide that they will just wait for the night and go and pick her up the next morning. Now Helga, being a wise and prescient woman, can sense that there has been treachery, and so she decides that she will escape before they come and get her the next morning. And that same night she jumps off Geirshólmr with her 2 children and swims from the island all the way to the mouth of Hvalfjörður here. She's carrying her 4-year-old son Björn, and her 8-year-old son Grímkell is trying to swim on his own. She swims all the way from the island to here, to the mouth of the Blauskeggsá, that means the Blackbeard River, which is here, swims all the way to the mouth of this river, leaves her 4-year-old son there, and then swims back to help Grímkell in his swimming, manages to help him come to the mouth of the river too. And then, after taking a brief rest somewhere in the mountains here, she begins a 20-kilometre trek through the night, up the river and through the mountains, to the house of Indriði and Þorbjörg. Þorbjörg, remember, was Hörðr's sister. Indriði is not back yet. He's waiting with the other farmers until the next morning so they can go and collect her. And so, by the time Helga arrives, it's only Þorbjörg home. She meets with Þorbjörg and pleads for her protection, to which Þorbjörg agrees. And so she decides she will hide them. She locks them in an outbuilding, and and waits for her husband to arrive. Now you remember Þorbjörg's oath. She said that she was going to kill whoever killed her brother Hörðr. So when Indriði gets back home that next day, later that evening, when they get in bed together, Þorbjörg draws a small knife and tries to kill her husband Indriði, showing that, you know, despite all the things that Hörðr had done to her, her familial loyalty was still very strong. Indriði manages to protect himself, and he ends up with just a wound on his hand. But after this scuffle, he asks her what he can do for reconciliation with her. And she says, well, you must kill Þorsteinn Gullknappur, who was, if you remember, the man who swung the axe. So Indriði agrees. He goes to the house of Þorsteinn, which, as you remember, is just at the feet of this mountain here. And he is praying in his pagan temple, and Indriði comes up behind him and beheads him. And then when he gets back home again, Þorbjörg demands one last thing before she will offer her support and love to her husband again. And that is that if Helga and the children are alive, Indriði must offer them protection. Now Indriði thinks that he can agree to this very easily, of course, because he presumes that Helga and the children have drowned. He doesn't expect them to show up. But after he has made this oath, Þorbjörg opens the outbuilding, brings Helga and the children in, and so now Indriði, bound by his oath, has to protect them. So they live there for a little while under Indriði's protection until 4 years pass, when Hörðr's son Grímkell is now 12 years old. Helga goads her son, now at an age of majority, to carry out a vengeance killing for her husband Hörðr. He has to kill a farmer who I believe is named Þórður. So he does engage in battle with Þórður, but unfortunately everyone on both sides of that battle are killed. And so again, after this escalation of violence, Indriði can see that it is no longer safe to protect Helga and her remaining son Björn here in Iceland, so he ships them back to Gotland, the home of Helga's father, the Jarl. But even after that point, once Björn himself reaches an age of majority and becomes a large and strong man, he returns to Iceland and continues to carry out vengeance killings on behalf of his father. And apparently all of these vengeance killings are all carried out with either the counsel or the intelligence of either of the two women, Helga or Þorbjörg. And in the end, it turns out that 24 men are killed on behalf of Hörðr, and compensation is paid for none of them. And apparently that's the greatest number of men killed in vengeance for any man in all of medieval Icelandic history. So ends the story of Harðar Saga, the tale of a man who is honourable, courageous and intelligent, though the victim of bad influences and even worse luck. And it's also the tale of the two tough and intelligent women who stick by Hörðr and make sure that his tragic death is avenged. So that's it for another episode of Saga Stories with the Reykjavík Grapevine. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to like, comment and subscribe below. My name is Dr. Matthew Roby from the University of Iceland, and I'd like to thank you once more for watching, and we hope you'll tune in next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.